Hello everyone. Today's lesson is on hormones. So our objective is to know how hormones regulate blood glucose levels. You will be set some past exam questions to do with this screencast. So make sure that you look out for those as well. Okay, so the first thing I'd like you to do, as always, is complete the retrieval practice. So if you can please answer the 10 questions, make sure you pause the screencast, and then when you've completed them, get yourself a green pen or a different coloured pen and mark your answers. Okay, pause the screencast now. Okay, let's have a see how you have done. So number one, what is the definition of a communicable disease? For this, you should have said a communicable disease is one that can be passed from organism to organism and is caused by a pathogen, such as a virus or bacteria. Number two, which vessel carries water around the plant? That is the xylem. What is the function of a valve? Valves are found either in the heart or in veins, and they stop the backflow of blood. In which part of a plant cell does photosynthesis happen? That would be the chloroplast. Number five, which word describes the loss of water from a leaf? That is transpiration. Number six, which two parts of the body make up the central nervous system? That would be the brain and the spinal cord. Number seven, which part of the body is the coordinator in a voluntary response? That is the brain. Which type of receptors are found in the eyes? Light receptors. Number nine, which two parts of the body are effectors? The answer is muscles or glands. And number 10, which word describes something that your body responds to? You should have put a stimulus. Okay. Right, so we are going to be looking at hormones that regulate your blood sugar levels. So that's what glucose is. It is a sugar. Now, last lesson we looked at the endocrine system. So we talked about the glands, the organs, which hormones are released and from where, and it was more of an overview. So today we're going to be looking at more detail into how hormones, in particular insulin and glucagon, regulate your blood glucose level, so keep them at the correct level. If you can possibly watch the YouTube clip there, so type that into your phone or into a computer and have a go at watching that introduction to this topic, and then come back to this screencast. Okay, so what is blood glucose? Blood glucose is just a type of sugar. So there are different types of sugar: lactose, fructose. Glucose is just another type, but it's the type that our body actually uses as an energy source. So we need to eat food, our body breaks the food down, the glucose gets into our blood and is distributed to our respiring cells, so our cells that are doing the process of respiration, to release energy. So that's a little bit of revision from B1. So the glucose reacts with oxygen to make the products, which are carbon dioxide and water, but as well energy is released. So glucose is really important, but it's got to be at the correct level in your blood. And if it isn't, our body has to respond to either bring it down to where it should be or bring it back up. So what affects the level of blood glucose? Hopefully this is a little bit of common sense. So when you eat, your blood glucose levels rise, so they go up. And if you do vigorous exercise, your blood glucose level will fall. And that is because when you're exercising, you need to respire more. And if you are respiring more glucose will react with oxygen to release the energy that you need to complete the vigorous exercise. Okay, so make sure you know that glucose is a sugar. When we eat, our blood glucose level goes up. When we exercise, our blood glucose level goes down. Okay, next part then. So your blood glucose levels are actually monitored by your pancreas. So the pancreas is a gland in your body that monitors how much glucose you have in your blood. Now, depending on how much glucose is in your blood, depends on what your pancreas does. So we're going to start by talking about when your blood glucose levels are too high. So for example, you may have just had a really big meal and then you sat on the sofa. So you will be using a little bit of glucose for respiration, but not a lot. So your blood glucose level will go high. So the pancreas will then respond to the blood glucose level rising by releasing insulin. Now, insulin will then travel in the blood to the target organ, which is your liver. And what happens there is that the liver changes the glucose. So it takes the glucose out of the blood and it turns it into glycogen. So glycogen is our storage molecule, our insoluble storage molecule, mainly stored in the liver. Some can be stored in the muscles as well, but for now we'll just talk about it being stored in the liver. What that means is that because the glucose has been taken out of your blood glucose will drop down to where it should be. Okay, so the key points are that the pancreas releases insulin, the insulin travels to the liver takes the blood glucose, the glucose out of the blood and turns it into glycogen, okay? And this is all happening when your blood glucose levels are too high, okay? So just go over that one more time. Blood glucose levels are too high. Your pancreas detects this and releases insulin. The insulin travels by the blood to the liver, and the liver will then take the glucose out of the blood and turn it into our storage molecule called glycogen. That causes your blood glucose level to fall back to where it should be. Okay, now sometimes your blood glucose level will fall too much, okay, which is when something else has to happen. So you may have done lots of exercise and not eaten enough, or your body may have produced a bit too much insulin and therefore your blood glucose level has dropped too low. Again, this is monitored by the pancreas. But this time, if your blood glucose is too low, your pancreas will release glucagon. Okay, now glucagon is another hormone, and that hormone again will travel to the liver, but this time, instead of glucose being taken out of the blood, the glycogen that is stored there is turned back into glucose, and then that glucose is released into the blood. Okay, so I'll go through that again slowly so you can try and follow. So your pancreas will detect that there is not enough glucose in your blood. It will release a different hormone. This time it is called glucagon. The glucagon will travel in the blood to the liver. The liver will then turn the glycogen back into glucose, and the glucose is then passed into the blood, which means that your blood glucose level will rise. Okay, now I like ways of remembering things, and there's a little hint there that you'll see on that slide which says when the glucose has gone, glucagon is released. Okay, it's a little bit silly, but it's how I remember being taught, and it's stayed with me for a very long time. So when the glucose has gone, glucagon will be released. Now I know that's a lot of information, so what I've done is I've put that into hopefully a more concise diagram which will help you remember it, which is coming up now. But before we do that, we're going to do a quick true or false. So if you could answer these 5 questions and say whether they are true or false, and if they are false, can you have a go at correcting them, please? When you're finished, unpause and we will go through the answers. Okay, question number 1. Insulin is made in the pancreas. That is true. Question number 2. The target organ of insulin is the stomach. That is false. The target organ of insulin is the liver. Number 3. When blood glucose levels are too low, insulin is released. That is false. When the blood glucose levels are too low, glucagon is released. Number 4, insulin and glucagon are both made of protein. That's absolutely true. And number 5, insulin and glucagon travel in the bloodstream. That is also true. Okay, so we're now going to look at a concise diagram explaining what we have just been thinking about. So this is an example of a negative feedback loop, which is often questioned on the higher paper for B2. Now, if you look there at the centre of the diagram, you've got normal glucose level. That is where your glucose should be. If you eat a meal, your blood glucose will rise. Okay, so there'll be too much sugar in your blood. This is then detected by the pancreas, and the pancreas will then release insulin. Remember, insulin is a hormone, it is made of protein. It will then travel in the bloodstream and it will cause the liver to take in the glucose and convert it into glycogen. And because the liver is taking in that glucose and storing it as glycogen, the blood glucose level is going to fall back to normal. Okay, so this is a really concise way of showing what happens when we have to have our blood glucose levels regulated. Okay, moving on to the next one then. If your blood glucose level falls due to exercise, or you may not have eaten enough food, again, your pancreas will release a hormone. This time it is called glucagon. Remember, when the glucose is gone, you release glucagon. The glucagon will then travel in the bloodstream to the liver, where the liver will change. It will convert that glycogen, that storage molecule, back into the glucose, and the glucose will go back into the blood, increasing the blood glucose level back to normal. Okay, so if we have a look at those two diagrams together, this is what it looks like. Make sure you've got a copy of that. If you need to pause it, that's absolutely fine. So you've got normal glucose level, blood level rising, blood level fall, and what happens to get them back to normal. Remember, this is an example of negative feedback. And negative feedback is when something moves away from the normal, your body responds by either bringing it back down or pulling it up. So in this case, if your blood glucose level rises, the negative feedback loop will bring it down back to normal. But if your normal glucose level falls, the negative feedback loop will release glucagon to bring it back up to normal. Okay, so moving on then. Unfortunately, not everybody is able to control their blood glucose level efficiently. And this is when people are said to have diabetes. Now, there are two types of diabetes that you need to know about, type 1 and type 2. Now, we'll talk first about type 1, which usually begins in childhood. Doctors can find out if somebody has diabetes. One of the ways actually is by doing the Benedict's test, which is a test that we talked about in B1, and they test for sugar, because you shouldn't have sugar in your urine, but if there is sugar in the urine, it can be a sign of diabetes. So type 1 is when the person's own immune system has destroyed the pancreatic cells that make insulin. So your pancreatic cells do not work properly, therefore insulin is not released. This can be controlled with insulin injections, but people who are diabetic must control their diet and exercise as well, because if they're doing lots of exercise, they will need less insulin because the glucose will be being used for respiration. Okay, but they can use the injections, and but they also must watch out how much what they eat and their exercise levels as well. Okay, that is something they are born with. So type 1 is something that people are born with. Type 2 occurs later in life. So the person's cells of the pancreas either do not produce enough insulin, so the cells aren't working properly, so there's not enough insulin being made, or there is damage to the cells in the body and they don't respond to the insulin. So there's some insulin there, they just don't respond properly. Now, scientists have found a link between type 2 diabetes and obesity. So people who have obesity, who are obese, have got a higher chance of getting type 2 diabetes. Now, it can be controlled with a balanced diet and the loss of weight, if overweight. So doctors will often tell people who have type 2 diabetes that they need to lose weight. This will help them to manage the diabetes and sometimes to reverse it. Type 2 patients may also take medicines which can help the body produce more insulin. Look at your knowledge organiser for more information on this topic. Have a great day.